Hi, thank you for joining us today. I'm Crystal Wittevrongle, collaborating with Common Sense Calgary, and we're here today with Sheldon Yakiwchuk, who is running for Ward 4 City Council in Calgary's upcoming 2025 election. Sheldon, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Hey, thanks for giving me some time to go over the platform. These are incredible.
Awesome. Well, yeah, let's start there then. Can you tell me a bit about yourself? What foundation do you have that's leading you into the hopes of being city councilor for Ward 4?
And that's an excellent question because the more of these that I do, the more I realize how much I've left out. And so I always get, feedback questions, whether it's from emails or phone calls, people meeting me afterwards in the community. And, it's really hard to kind of go through that and not take up the entire length of time. But let's go with a lifetime in Ward 4. And I don't mean my whole life, but, starting off in North Haven Elementary, which is a part of Ward 4, having one of my first jobs in Beddington, part of Ward 4, one of my first businesses in Greenview, Ward 4, and now with over 3 decades of living in Dalhousie, raising my children here, and now having grandchildren inside of the community is really important to me. But in addition to that, I've run 3 businesses inside of the ward, so I've got a good sense of, what it takes to maintain quality service, quality product. But then in addition to that, I've worked for 3 multi-billion-dollar companies, 2 manufacturers, 1 service provider. One was an international company. And we worked with things that we called KPIs, key performance indicators. And we had to work with profit and loss, margins. And I think that's a lot of what Calgarians are starting to see is instead of running the city like it's just a spending spree, is to have a some sense of the things that city's supposed to maintain, our infrastructure and essential services, keeping inside of a budget where we're not continuously expanding, and getting the job done.
Yeah, exactly. So it sounds like you're doing a lot of on the ground conversations with people in the ward. And so, other than what you've mentioned with infrastructure and things like that and spending, what else are you hearing from constituents in the ward as being areas of concern or some of their top priorities?
Well, the densification, the blanket upzoning has been the number one most contentious issue
Mhm.
inside of the history of Calgary. So I do hear a lot about that. I hear a lot of concern over vote splitting and ending up with the same mayor or some of the same people even on council.
Mhm.
And so when you go through and you start to dig into these things, you can appreciate where people do have their concerns. And even when we look at something as simple as the number of campaign signs that are out in the city right now, a lot of people, and especially having driven around the ward, putting out my own, I can see why people are concerned with this. There's a lot of money being thrown at this election. The last election was, I'm going to say, straight up bought for $1.7 million. And that's why we see a lot of the things inside of Calgary that the Calgarians really don't appreciate,
Mhm.
whether it's the streets being in poor condition, the water main break, whether it's the blanket upzoning, or things like stealing away our heritage. Stealing away our heritage seems to be a really big concern with a lot of people inside of Calgary, but it's also been brought up several times inside of the ward. And whether that's the rebranding of the city to Blue Sky, or the renaming of Heritage Park to the Confluence Center, Fort Calgary to the Confluence Center, or removing Olympic Plaza. People are concerned that, why are we stripping away the identity of Calgary? We come with all of our glory, but we have some baggage, we have some warts, but this has been a welcoming community. It's a very diverse community inside of the entire city, but also inside of the ward.
Mhm.
So, these are some of the concerns, and it's the one size fits all that I think that Calgarians aren't too appreciative of, where their ward or their community isn't being represented through some of these very distinct policies.
So you hit on a few things there that I want to chat with you about, but let's just jump right to the blanket rezoning. And so we did see that as being such a contentious issue at the time and still ongoing in the debates surrounding it, both in terms of supporters and then those who oppose either the policy or the way that the city went about it. So you support the policy as it stands, or did you have differing thoughts on how that should have happened at the council level?
Sorry, just adjusting. No, so because it was such a contentious issue, and because it was one of the number one things that people were bringing to me at the door, where do you stand on blanket rezoning? I'm full
Mhm.
repeal. What I'd done is I'd actually created a survey, or, sorry, not a survey, a petition to hand out at all the doors in Ward 4, as well as to promote through on social media. So as a part of my campaign and a part of my campaign budget, I'd taken very strong to this. I took the words of the people that from inside of our community and put out some very simple guidelines as to how our community or how Calgarians want to see upzoning go. Nobody
Mhm.
is really opposed to densification or modernizing or development inside of their community. Almost nobody. There's the odd person that says, they're building a basement suite across the street. It's going to cause some parking issues. And I mean, those are things that we definitely have to address. But the densification as a whole in a blanket one size fits all policy doesn't work. So inside of the petition that I have on my website, so people can fill it out online, or if they've gotten a leaflet in the door, it asks for just a few simple things, and those things, keeping character with the community, making sure that we have the infrastructure and essential services like schools to support more densification, and then making sure that the community is engaged. I mean, how are these wrong policies? So this is what the people of Ward 4, the Calgarians, have asked for, and this is what I'm trying to deliver into City Council. But there's another thing that's actually propped up inside of the community, and it's what I call blanket rezoning 2.0. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the transit-oriented communities, but
Mhm.
we've got one going on inside of my personal community in Dalhousie, which is a part of Ward 4. There is a couple more proposals throughout the rest of the city, but this one, kind of hits hard inside of home. So having lived for over 3 decades inside of Dalhousie, we were here before there was Dalhousie Station LRT, before the tracks extended out here.
Mhm.
So we've seen the changes inside of the community, the increased crime, and what it's really brought. The parking issues were very distinct when we were the end of the line. So
Mhm.
when it extended past Dalhousie and people could park in other communities to use the park and ride and the LRT, then it was, it eased up on a lot of that. We got rid of some of the zoned parking, um, and that was good. So we somewhat normalized from that position. But since then, there's been another development inside of the community. They've added 459 suites in what they'd considered, a transit community, where it's zoned for 1,200 properties. But now, under the Transit-Oriented Communities program, what they want to do is they want to wipe out 640 parking spots inside of Dalhousie Station and put in more housing. Now, the 640 spots are full Monday to Friday,
Hmm.
and commuters overflow into the community. So we've already started to see the 2-hour parking signs go up.
Mhm.
Now, there was a survey that was put out by, about the transit-oriented communities. Leaflets were handed out in mailboxes, and they put up 2 signs inside of the community. That's all we got for engagement, was one of the
Mhm.
leading surveys. And by leading, I mean it's going to more try and encourage people to accept this into their community instead
Mhm.
of not. And the results showed that the majority of the people that answered, was 80%, 81%, said that they don't want it. That they know that it's going to cause more parking issues and more traffic issues, and
Mhm.
75% opposed to the idea entirely. Now, when we're discussing this at the debates between me and the other 4 Ward 4 councillors, they support it and they say, yeah, parking's the issue, so we're going to work to address that. But no, it's not just the issue. We don't want it. Our community has spoken. So I'm running against 2 people that don't live inside of Dalhousie specifically, who, instead of listening to the people inside of the community, are going to go ahead with this project and put expensive band-aids on it, which is the exact same concerns that a lot of Calgarians have with City Council right now. We're
Mhm.
not being heard as individual communities, and we're not being heard inside of our ward.
Mhm. Mhm. So that you touched on quite a few very interesting points there. One being housing, And so we see record numbers of people moving to Calgary from, other parts of Canada as well as outside of Canada, and housing has become really a hot button issue for a lot of people, and is leading some of the way in these development discussions or rezoning or upzoning, moving the parking spaces to housing, that sort of thing. So if not the blanket rezoning or transitioning some of this, it's not unusable land if it's parking, but some of this non-housing to housing. What is your thoughts on an alternative to that, if not those sorts of policies, in order to accommodate this huge influx of people that we've seen moving into our communities?
Well, and you've touched on a couple of interesting points there. So we've actually started to see somewhat what we call normalization of the population growth inside of the city of Calgary and inside of the province of Alberta. So when the city did its last profile for the last election, from 2016 to 2021, we'd seen 5.5% growth for that period of time, which is about 1.1% growth inside of the city of Calgary, which
Mm-hmm.
is considered organic. Organic growth is less than 1%, and it's up to 2%. So 1.1%, and because that did cover some of the COVID period, maybe that had somewhat of a hamper on it because the housing concerns weren't as big. People weren't going out. People weren't shopping for houses. People were afraid of the sniffles.
Mm-hmm.
That looks like, right? We were restricted in our movement, so and people basically stayed home. So we'd seen only the 5.5% growth. Well, when we look at how the population did explode, in 2023 that number was 5.5% increased population. So in 2023 we'd grown more population than we'd grown since 2016 to 2021.
Mm-hmm.
In 2024 that number was 5.8%, which is huge. So we'd grown, essentially in 2 years, what we should have seen for 10 years worth of growth inside of
Mm-hmm.
the. But for the most recent numbers, that's fallen back to 3.8%. Okay. So that's what I mean by we're starting to normalize in population,
Mm-hmm.
which is good because, what we're seeing is we're seeing our healthcare services, whether it's just trying to find a doctor inside of our communities,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that results in the 9 to 10 hour waits in emergency rooms for people that, once again, may have the sniffles. So when there's too much population, we just don't have the rest of the infrastructure, the rest of the essential services to provide for it. So seeing the normalization is good. But what we need to start doing is start paying attention to what we're seeing in both Vancouver and in Toronto in the housing markets.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, if you bought in Toronto over the last 5 years, you're underwater in the value of your home because the bubble is hit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What people in Calgary don't realize is that the bubble's hit. Nobody's talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So while the hot button is still talking about housing and affordable housing, we should start actually looking at the statistics. So the most recent statistics that were posted came from June, which said that housing availability by rental properties is at 7.2%. Now, not a lot of people are going to understand what that means.
Yeah.
That's the highest it's been in the last decade.
Mm-hmm.
The highest rental vacancy in the last decade. And I've had people from the community reach out to me and confirm this. They're saying, where we rely on having to rent out a suite in our home or our basement, we now are in a very competitive market and have to lower our rates. So what they'd looked
Mm-hmm.
at as an investment into their property, something that could help them with the affordability crisis,
Mm-hmm.
they're now starting to see issues with, does this actually pay off? Am I letting somebody into my home and not going to be seeing any of the benefits from it?
Mm-hmm.
Now, with that in consideration, the housing market has 3.4 months of supply for homes in Calgary. So if people wanted to buy a home, there's 3.4 months of supply. Now, that's a big number.
Mm-hmm.
But what's even bigger is that there is 24 to 25,000 properties, and these are single detached, semis, suites, apartments that are in the pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
So where we already don't have an issue with people finding vacancies, and where we already don't have a shortage of new supply of houses, where we are normalizing our population, and where we're already starting to see a 10% decrease in market values on resales of homes year over year, We got to start paying attention to the actual statistics instead of the ideologies and everybody talking about what affordable housing is. Because, Crystal, what does affordable housing mean to you?
That was actually a question I was going to be asking you is, do you support affordable housing? And what's your view on it? Should the city be taking an active stance, or should it be left mainly to the market to decide and allocate housing? Like, what is your view on how that actually should play out? Because while we're seeing, maybe there's more rental vacancies at the moment, there's also an affordability crisis, as you also kind of touched on. So how do you balance those needs for folks with affordable housing and the city's view if you were to become councillor?
Well, if you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, there's no benefits. So when we talk about affordable housing and should the city help, help this through funding, what we have to realize is that making somebody else's home through property taxes less affordable to try and make somebody else's marginally more affordable, which has been a complete failure because that's not what we're seeing inside of the marketplace, nobody benefits.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing families and we're seeing our elderly being priced out of their homes, out of their communities where they've spent decades inside of them, maintaining their properties, cutting their lawns, updating their houses, getting the yearly checks on their furnaces and their appliances. They're now at situations where, with fixed incomes or with, the market and the way it is right now, the job market, nobody feels the security. So when we're taking away money from families and when we're pricing seniors out of their homes, it's not a good deal. If somebody has to sell their home in a community that they've lived their entire life in, but can only afford to move into a smaller suite, which doesn't give them their backyard, which doesn't give them, a place to walk around, it's not familiar to them. It's a bad deal. The city should work to facilitate housing, absolutely, but we have a 40-year supply of property inside of Calgary at current building rates that we don't need to expand the city. All we need to do is facilitate the development of these things that has to be respectful of people inside of their communities, not stealing away their parking, their privacy, not eclipsing their homes, their backyards, their gardens, or their solar panels. I've met with a couple of people that have solar panels on their homes inside of Ward 4, where the homes that have gone up, either behind them or right beside them, have either partially or fully eclipsed their solar generation abilities. So when you drop your solar panels down in the summertime to 50% as the sun's lower on the horizon, that goes to either 25% or zero. Well, those are large investments that people have made in their properties to try and keep things more affordable. And when these, these concerned people with, something that's being, imposing on their property, have gone to the city and tried to talk to them about, what's being developed, the city says, well, you can sue the developer. No, you can't sue the developer for something that the city is actually allowed. But the costs of the lawsuit, what somebody is going to have to go through to do that, is going to supersede, or greatly exceed the value that they have inside of their properties, or the values that they're trying to replace. So it's not being responsible to the people who have invested in their community. And it's not providing more affordable housing because, one, we haven't defined what affordable housing is. Two, the costs of labor, the costs of materials have greatly increased. One of the big considerations for people inside of their homes right now is the cost of insurance, their home insurance. Now, my home insurance increased by 25% year over year from last year to this year. We just got our most recent bill, and that's a big jump. And we don't have a claim in.
Yeah.
Well, these things are being passed on to homeowners who are investing in their properties or homeowners who are investing in other properties. So when the costs of everything else go up and our idea of affordability stays the same, it's not moving with the market, then again, we're not seeing any advantages. And, go to McDonald's. Remember when we had those dollar menus? And then everybody was like shocked when the dollar menus hit $1.49 for a junior chicken sandwich. Then it hit $1.69. You could still eat 3 of them for around $5. Try and do the same thing right now, and that's $12 out of pocket.
Hmm.
Well, if you're, if something like fast food or beef in the grocery stores has increased by 50%, we're not seeing, people talking about that as a part of the equation.
Hmm.
But when we see the values of the properties since 2021, where the average detached family home was 425,000, now at 725,000, we're not going to see that affordability until we see the absolute bubble collapse. And again,
Hmm.
with 24 to 25,000 properties still in the pipeline, and with the 3.4-month vacancy, or yes, 3.4-month supply of houses, 7.2% vacancy rate on rentals, the bubble's here. We just haven't seen it. That affordability crisis is going to actually turn itself into collapsing the real estate market. We're starting to see the early signs of it. Nobody's paying attention. The conversations are wrong right now.
So would you say then, like with the blanket rezoning, getting more units to market, which is, a goal, is that going to play into helping lower those costs? And we've seen in the year that 1 year in, the city reports that the blanket rezoning has contributed to 1,500 new units. And so, do you see that as playing a part in eventually kind of driving those costs down and bringing some affordability to the housing? And then there'll be a follow-up question to that after as well.
Again, at the cost of collapsing the real estate market inside of Calgary, which we'd seen in 2016 and 2008 through the global collapse,
Hmm.
global economy collapse. It's not an idea of robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's an idea of blowing up the actual market, stealing away the value that people have accumulated inside of their homes, or the people that have bought in the last 5 years being in an underwater situation. Has it contributed to that? Well, sure it has. But when we look at the blanket up zoning, what they're doing is they're rationalizing these 4, 8, 12, 24 plexes on single or multiple lots, so 1 to 2 lots. Those are being put in as a part of the equation, saying, this is really helping out, but it's not. It's the larger developments. It's the buildings that are 6 stories high, that are stick frame, which is a big concern on safety, that are actually burdening the load. So
Hmm.
we're saying, take the good with the bad. We've added so many properties, so suck it up, Buttercup. Your property doesn't matter because we've provided 1,500 new suites to people in the market, and we've drove down prices. That's not what driving down prices. Sure, the extra surplus is helping to curb some of that, but how much? And I don't
Hmm.
think the city can actually say when again we're looking at people are fleeing, people aren't coming in as fast because there's no economy. We're starting to collapse the economy through employment and youth employment rates. People
Hmm.
aren't going to move to a city where they can't find a job.
Yeah.
So
And
it's a much bigger, more complicated conversation than, yeah, we put a few more houses out and look, it's already working. No, stop
yeah.
it. Let's have the real conversations. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, no, no, I agree. It is a very complicated and complex conversation. But if we're looking just at the blanket rezoning policy and that 1,500 new units, if we were going to assess the policy based on that, it would look like a success, or you could say, it has successfully accomplished that. So if you were to evaluate the blanket rezoning, if not using that 1,500 new units, how would you evaluate that, like in terms of being a successful policy, even though it's early on, as we know?
One of the developments downtown bragged 240 new suites. Those 240 new suites coming in at about 1,600 starting for affordability. Is 1,600 bucks a month affordable? Is that what they consider affordability? Because again, just seeing a surplus on the market that doesn't meet what anybody considers affordability is a failure. So
Hmm.
how would I look at it to consider it a success? Well, I mean, what sort of mental gymnastics am I going to have to go through to see an increase in the cost of property for the vast majority of Calgarians in their owning their own homes,
Hmm.
to try and rationalize taking over their communities that isn't providing anything that anybody realizes as affordable.
Mhm.
What do you have? How can I do that? I can't. It's impossible for me to again try and wrap my brain around what the city considers a success on that, or what anybody else would.
Mhm. Mhm.
People are
Okay.
still talking about, I can't afford to live in a home. I
Yeah.
get that. So we're all making adjustments. And again, people that have lived in lives their entire, they've raised their families there. They're there with their spouses, or their spouses have passed on. They're there as widowers, have had to open up suites in their basement so that
Mhm.
their home is more affordable.
Yeah.
They're having to share property. They're having to make concessions. Other people don't want to do that, but still want affordability. Well,
Mhm.
let's take the situation as a whole. Let's realize that everybody's going through this, not just the
Mhm.
people at one scale of the economic balance, or in the economic uh, side of the population.
Yeah, yeah. And so we've mentioned affordability and spending, and we've talked about that. I want to drill now into the property taxes conversation. We're seeing consistent increases in property taxes. Calgarians have spoken numerous times in polling saying the increase in property taxes is a major concern for a lot of homeowners, and even for renters, as that eventually gets passed on to them. And so when we're thinking about city spending and initiatives that ultimately cost funds that are paid for by property taxes, um, what are you hearing from people in your ward? Like, what are the concerns regarding property taxes? Are folks just, happy with the increase, or are they seeing that this is a big problem? Like it's easy to see from a polling perspective, but for your ward specifically, is this a major concern?
Well, I mean, again, because we live in an aged community, we're now starting to be considered somewhat. Some of the communities in Ward 4 are considered inner city.
Hmm.
I've never actually met a person who said, "Tax me more, Daddy." You don't find those people out there. The big concerns that people have is around the property taxes. Is the failures of infrastructure, the failures of maintenance inside of the city, the sliding city services, while the city's committing funds to things that are impractical. So
Hmm.
let's take as an example the bicycle lanes. Every year we're spending $20 million to extend the bicycle lanes inside of the community. Meanwhile, the bicycle lanes are getting prioritization, or seemingly getting prioritization, on snow removal in the wintertime. So this last winter, we'd seen buses and vehicles stranded, the main uh, transportation method of Calgarians, especially during snowstorms, where they cleared the bicycle lanes, but buses and cars were stranded. So when people see things like that, they get frustrated. When they extend the length of the curb, or the length of the cleaning from the curb inside a community, so like mine, I live on a main drag. They've moved this out to, I think it's 10 feet now. What that does is it makes a large obstacle that I either have to clear away if I park in my street, from the snow that the city piles there, or I can't park in the street anymore. So that takes away from that. But
Hmm.
what Calgarians are also seeing is that we're seeing invasive species growing along our main motorways, and in some, like on John Laurie, as just before we turn into McKnight, there is concrete structures where there are sucker trees growing out of there. There's unkempt lawn. We put up barriers along John Laurie Boulevard, but now none of that can be mowed or maintained.
Hmm.
So we're seeing a decline in services. Now Calgarians, I'm not going to say everybody's happy about paying property taxes, but we understand our responsibility in maintaining what we call Calgary as a world-class city.
Hmm.
When we see that our services are starting to slide, but our property taxes are growing up, so we're not seeing the value. So property taxes are always going up, services are always going down, and this is what it looks like, and nobody wants to see that. If we're
Mhm.
seeing the value, if we're seeing rates of city increased property taxes by inflationary figures, if we're seeing an appreciation like that, then that's fine. But I think the way Calgarians need to look at their responsibility with the municipality, with the city,
Mhm.
is as a partnership. I'm going to maintain my home and my property. I'll pay you taxes, and you maintain the parts of the community that are important, that are a part of the mandate of the city.
Mhm.
That's our partnership. I understand that if I want to change out the fixtures in my house, that costs go up, and I understand that through the fluctuating costs of oil, if we have to repair potholes, that that there's going to be some increase of costs and labor and stuff. So if we can get along inside of this partnership, everything is good. But we've seen the housing market unreasonably inflated through massive and unsustainable immigration inside of the city. Again, that 10 years growth inside of two, inorganic growth. We're seeing a massive inflation in property values, massive decrease in what we consider our services.
Mhm.
And we're not looking at minor inflationary adjustments. We're
Yeah.
looking at big things where people are, you're being forced to eat the elephant that's inside of the room instead of being able to eat it in like an apple in small bites and swallow. Everybody's getting a little bit of indigestion from this.
And so if you were successful as a counselor and are, in City Hall, how would you rectify this? If people want better services, you likely are going to have to pay for them. Where's that money going to come from? Do you see it as coming from elsewhere, or do you see it as simply just an accepting of current, service standards, or conversely, increasing them through additional spending?
Well, throughout the conversation, I've thrown a couple of numbers at you, so you can see that maybe I'm a little over analytical. Maybe I'm just analytical enough. Maybe I'm not analytical enough. The CD Howe Institute just gave the city of Calgary a D plus on their financial transparency. They use two styles of bookkeeping. So really nobody knows where the money is going. When we do see some of these projects that are being dropped in, we think, is this going to be a benefit to our communities, or is it not going to be a benefit to our communities? And as an example, I'm going to use the Indigenous housing project that Mayor Gondek just released a couple of weeks ago. $30 million to build subsidized housing for the First Nations population inside of the city of Calgary. Now, this is a lifelong commitment to Calgarians. This is going to be a tax that we're going to have to burden and pay for the rest of our lives because this commitment. This is fully subsidized housing. This is a responsibility of the province and of the federal government.
Mhm.
But now this is going to be borne by Calgarians. So when we see that we have a D plus in financial transparency, and when we see projects like this, what we actually have to do is we have to get our heads wrapped around as to where our money is actually going to.
Mhm.
Now, as an example, from 2023 to 2024, the city administrators have increased the size of and the capacity of the number of employees by, it was 2,300, 2,269, something like that. Let's call it 2,300 for nice round numbers, and
I
because I
like
don't
round
remember
numbers.
the actual number. It's around. It's about 2,300 positions. But again, so we're looking at 2,300 new employees.
Mhm.
But what are those 2,300 employees actually doing? So we've seen a lot of bloat inside of the federal and even inside of the provincial government sizes. We're creating these new positions, which is great. People need good jobs, but what are we getting for them? So we have to do an analytics on saying, okay, 15 years ago, the city was a lot safer. People felt comfortable on our LRTs. Grass was being mowed, weeds were being taken care of, streets were being plowed. We didn't have bicycle lanes. We weren't paying for nonsense. Programs like $5.4 million to rebrand the city. Where are we spending this money? And when we look at some of these programs, we have to appreciate how many of these things did the previous councils make us responsible for, and how many of these things can we actually trim away and get back to something that is more fiscally responsible to the taxpayers? There's going to be cuts. There has to be cuts.
Yes.
Calgarians are demanding it.
One thing that you mentioned previously was responsibilities of the provincial and the federal government. And that's something that has been a conversation amongst Calgarians for a while now, is where the city council is taking on things that is not within their realm. And so, from your perspective, what is the role of city government and municipal government compared to the roles and responsibilities of the provincial or the federal government?
Well, I mean, these things have been set out for decades, ever since we've decided to throw and form governments. And the responsibility of the city, I mean, sure, there's a certain amount to socialize programs, but then there are the main things like essential services. And by essential services, we're looking at police and fire, ambulance, emergency services is part of the provincial responsibilities. But then we're also looking at the essential infrastructure that we still consider, transit as a part of.
Mm-hmm.
So essential services, core infrastructure, and then a portion of that is on socialized programs. Not the majority,
Mm-hmm.
a portion of it. The rest of it, we have to look towards the provincial and federal government. We haven't increased the size of the population by 15% over the last 3 years because Calgary is a wonderful place. We've done that because of mass and unsustainable immigration policies by the federal Liberal government under Justin Trudeau. Calgarians, Edmontonians, Albertans have had enough of this, as a lot of other provinces are being choked out. Again, when we see our youth can't get jobs throughout the summer, that's a taxation on parents. Because when they rely on their children not just earning a couple bucks, but taking on those senses of responsibility and getting their foot in the door, those are some of the essential things that we see inside of what the federal government has imposed on the country.
Mm-hmm.
But is that a job for the city to take care of? It's actually not. So we have to look at, I hate to throw the terms around, but we have to look at infrastructure, not ideologies.
And another thing I wonder about, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on, is the city the best operator for things like trash collection or golf courses, or do you think perhaps that could be better utilized by a private operator?
I absolutely do. So I've had a couple of meetings, and these are regarding partnerships. Now, one of the things that I can appreciate is because the city has grown so fast, we have a lot more children inside of our community, and athletics and athletic programs, physical health is huge. When we see children that are committed to athletic programs, when we see their focus directed towards those things, we see a lot less kids that are on handheld devices, gaming, taking on poor health habits, and potentially taking to the streets for maybe not the best roles or with the best role models in their lives. So when I've met with the CMSA and I met with one of the charter schools, there's a couple of proposals that are either going to be part of what we see as the game plan, or if we scrap the game plan and just move towards funding these programs, where these benefits can actually come into play. So I'll give you an example. I've met with Shane Wenzel and the director of the CMSA, and we went out to the Shane Holmes Soccer Dome in the Northwest here. And I remember when it was built because my son was still playing soccer then. I was coaching at that time. And it was great because we didn't always have to drive down south. I mean, pack a lunch to get down to the Southside Soccer Dome. And I mean, it turns into a much more larger commitment inside of your day when you have to take driving and traffic and rush home from work and try and be a part of that. So this one was great. Now, the soccer dome in the Shane Holmes Soccer Dome is 20 years old. The life expectancy of those domes is 20 years. But because this is operated by the CMSA and not through city-run programs, 95% of its life expectancy is still inside of the dome. So it's at its life expectancy, but it still has 95% of that life expectancy left.
Yeah.
In addition, if we compare the Shane Holmes Soccer Dome to Shoaldice, which operates the same, the CMSA is able to operate in the black, meaning they're not losing money, meaning that they can, lower rates, or they can add in more programs. They're working to create financial opportunities, but that also creates benefits for our children in different leagues, in different matches. So, I mean, those are fantastic. That's what we call sustainable programs, not sustainability by what they're trying to impose on us through this climate alarmism stuff with EVs and renewable energy, which is, by far the least valuable to us, the most expensive, and the hardest on our environment. A whole other subject. The charter school that I'd met with is building a larger charter school. So they're K through 9 right now. They're trying to go to a new property to go to K through 12. They've already got the property. They're looking at investment from the city. And what that's going to look like is they're going to burden 80% of the maintenance and running costs of the new facilities, where the city only takes on 20%, but the city is going to, or the facility is going to allow for 80% of that to be public use time. Now, isn't that great? Where we actually can have these really effective partnerships that are more sustainable. They're going to cost taxpayers less, still provide these benefits, are going to work to increase the number of facilities without the massive burden.
Yeah.
In addition to these, when we look at city-led projects in development, I know I talk a lot, right?
No, you're on some things I wanted to talk with you about anyways. So it's all part of, the conversation that helps Calgarians understand your perspectives for the city.
So if we look at, two kind of programs, one I'm going to say is the EV buses. If it was a good program, and it's not, Edmonton's already proved that. We're looking at a $325 million investment into something that we don't have infrastructure for, where the premium on the buses is 60% greater than what we'll see through diesel or natural gas buses that we're currently using, that we have the infrastructure to support and supply already, plus the knowledge and capabilities on these things with available parts, which was the problem for Edmonton. The company that built the buses for Edmonton went bankrupt. They stopped honoring the warranties for them. And now they're left with a fleet of 80 buses that can't be fixed. Nobody knows how to, that they had to add in extra infrastructure to do. This started off as, I think it was 220 buses, and is razored down to 160 buses. So we're seeing an even greater cost. Instead of seeing just a 60% premium, we're now seeing 100% premium to buy a product that's heavier to maintain, that's going to be have more impact on streets that we're already failing to maintain. Okay, the city can't run a program. In addition to that, if we look at the other one of the big programs that the city invested in, is the fluoridation of our water. And this was kind of a contentious issue, but let's get past, even if fluoridation worked, even if it worked, and it doesn't, I can point people to two studies by the Cochrane Oral Health, the same institute that came out with the studies to promote this inside of municipal waters, where they showed that supplementation of fluoride in pregnant women and in children from 1 to 6 resulted in 0 benefits. There's no benefits on baby teeth by adding fluoride, direct supplementation to infants. If it doesn't work for the people that are the most vulnerable by taking direct supplementation, how is it working through water? Okay, but getting past all that, let's go into the actual project, because this is what we're talking about, how city can't do things, right? The initial project, when proposed and when talked about in the plebiscite for 2021 municipal election, was a $10 million project to add fluoridation back to the water. This is something that was going to have to, be borne by taxpayers. That project went from $10 million and ballooned to $28 million. Now that's 180% increase. That's almost triple the money that we were told. So I'm going to ask you something, Crystal. If you took your car to the mechanic says, listen, Crystal, you need a few things fixed. They're not under warranty. It's going to cost you $1,000. And you think, wow, man, you know what? That's a lot of money, but I need my car. I'm going to struggle with some things, but I want you to go ahead because this is essential to me. So the mechanic says, okay, that's great. You can pick it up tomorrow. So you call your mechanic the next day, and he says, no, it's not ready. It's not going to be ready for 3 more days because the length of the projects, of course, have extended. This fluoridation has extended wildly. Even on commissioning, they had to extend it by almost an additional quarter, an additional 3 months. Sorry. So then you say, okay, well, whatever. So, you wait the additional 5 days. You tough out that. You make it back to your mechanic, and he says, okay, Chris, well, here's the bill. And you say, well, my bill is $2,800. You told me it was going to be $1,000. He said, yeah, but
Get a new
that's what it
mechanic.
costs.
Yeah.
What would you say to your mechanic? I'm calling the cops. I'm calling the police. You're a criminal. And that's literally how taxpayers are viewing our essential services right now and how the city is handling these programs. It's not responsible fiscally, and it's not keeping the timelines. So when we look at effective partnerships that are going to ease the burden to taxpayers and still provide all the benefits, that's what we need to do. Is that going to work on garbage? Is that going to work on street cleaning? Well, when we look at the number of city employees, despite the fact that the property taxes through inflationary budgets, the $425,000 valuation on homes to $725,000 valuation on homes, when we look at that, when we look at the city's budget has increased by 50% over the last few years, that's from $4 billion to $6 billion. And when we look at the number of employees for the city has maintained about 51% of the budget, while we're still adding additional contractors to the payroll. Yeah, no, maybe contractors are the way to go, and that we can potentially cut back on what we have for city services and still see some responsibility inside of our communities with some cost-saving benefits.
Well, and what you were saying with the fluoride, but also mainly the mechanic example, really got me thinking about the green line. Seen it be quite the political pinball game. It's going to be serving less Calgarians for shorter track for much more money than was originally proposed. What are your thoughts on the Green Line LRT? Would you support it as it currently stands, or would you have suggestions for how to better manage that project in the future?
That actually goes into really a couple of different places. Again, and I go back to when we'd first built the LRT, or when the LRT was extended into Dalhousie, and there was an increase in time. Right now, inside of communities that have the LRT, there's about 1 in 3 homes, and on some streets it's every house, and some streets it's every other house that has perimeter security cameras, a doorbell camera, or security systems. And that's because of what we see inside of our communities is that the LRT is being used to transport crime throughout our cities. So taxpayers are picking up the bill for, paying for a taxpayer-funded transit system that delivers crime to their communities that we're now seeing as an additional taxation. On side of our homes, we're seeing more crime, less policing, and the businesses inside of our communities are being targeted. Now, how it translates is the businesses operate, of course, on something that we call profit. But if there's somebody that's going inside of our stores, breaking their windows, stealing stuff on a regular basis, in order to maintain those profit margins, those costs are increased on everything that we see that we have to buy. So inside of, whether it's Walmart or Safeway or Superstore, they've started to implement devices to try and keep out crime. So, when you go into the grocery stores, you have to go through gates now, right? Costco checks for memberships at the door. But even when you look at things like formula, baby formula inside of Walmart is behind plexiglass. And I mean, you have to get staff to come and help you get that out. That's how bad crime's gotten. And a lot of that does come from, the public transport system. It's a sign of the times. And I understand that. But again, When you look at Superstore, and we'd learned, throughout the last federal election, that Superstore relies on 3.5% profit. That's not a lot of money. 3.5%. I couldn't operate a business for 3.5% profit margin. And when you look at a company like Loblaws, they invest in multi-millions of dollars worth of real estate, maintenance, products. They have spoilage as a factor. They have, the costs of running business are insane. They rely on a very small margin, 3.5%. When theft goes up inside of those stores, they have to implement these theft devices. Those theft devices aren't free. And just to give you an idea of the sign of the times again, in Edgemont, which is a fairly affluent community, the Superstore that I regularly frequent, they have to pay staff to watch over the food bank hampers because of the theft there.
Mm-hmm.
Shameful situation for a world-class city in one of the most richest countries in the world. Anyways, so again, when we're looking at extending the Green Line, which all Calgarians want to see, an increase in public transport, we have to look at not just the benefit that this is going to offer, but the realities of the situation that's already offering. If we're not dealing with the crime on the LRTs right now, how can I, in good conscience, support a program that doesn't take this as a part of the consideration? Can we go ahead as planned? We're failing at the LRT. We're failing our current passengers by them not feeling safe on the existing rails. Why are we going to grow the problem into other communities? No, I think I do support the Green Line. I do want to see transit extend inside of this city, even out to the airport. Some of the proposals I think are good ideas, but we have to do them responsibly. We have to make sure that our commuters feel safe. We have to make sure that we're not transporting crime.
I would just suggest that we do that in concept of, the current transit strategy and making people feel safe, and driving down some of the violent crime that we're seeing on C trains or, downtown platforms, for instance.
Man, that's a whole can of worms in itself, isn't it? I mean, we could spend an hour just talking on this. There's a number of things happening in our downtown core, but mostly it's lawlessness. We have open drug use, we have open drug sales, we have the safe injection sites turning communities into public toilets. We have parks, communities, and neighborhoods that are left as dumping sites for drug paraphernalia. We have minor crimes that aren't being attended to because the city's over, our city police services, I believe, aren't provided the tools and with the manpower that they need to do this. So how do we make our commuters feel safe? There's a couple of different ways. One is investing into our police services. Two is by looking at potentially, having these things as part of gates. When we look at places in Quebec, when we look at cities inside of the States where they had these issues, something as simple as putting gates on platforms was able to reduce that. Will this be something that we can implement? Well, sure. But why would we, again, extend the Green Line and then have to go and retrofit all of these new stops if we can take that in as a part of the initial costs? So right now, while I'd look towards making our passengers feel safe on the transit platforms in, the high-risk times of day in the high-risk areas, that's not a cost that we can continue to absorb. We need our policing services inside of communities. We need our policing services dealing with, sometimes it's the mental health issues, sometimes it's the overdoses, but sometimes it is the crime inside of other communities.
Mm-hmm.
We need to, of course, increase the size of our forces, increase the tools that they have as a temporary fix. But then as the main is to look to, so let's see if we can responsibly come up with a program that's an easy maintenance, that's a one-time cost, not an expensive Band-Aid and not a forever program, to make our transit safer so that when we extend this into other people's community, they're not celebrating it while having to lock their doors or hit the key fob. People inside of my community, they've set alarms 7 o'clock at night, I know, and I hear this. You know, when somebody hits the key fob and you hear that horn honk, 7 o'clock at night, I have a few members of our community that go out and hit their key fob just to make sure that their car is locked. That's what we don't want to extend inside of other people's communities. We
Mm-hmm.
want this safely, responsibly, and on budget.
Do you have any program ideas? Because they did consider, council being they, did consider, putting in some gates into a gated system for transit, but ultimately rejected the idea because of cost and some of the logistical issues. So do you have any proposed solutions, or would you reopen the discussion on a gated system for transit?
Yeah, because I mean, I think it was foolish and irresponsible for them to dump that as a program idea. So, we'd seen a couple of transit workers that were either threatened, harassed, or violently attacked on their transits. And this is actually relegated to one of the communities inside of Calgary. It's not a citywide problem, but we don't want to protect one side of the city and then not protect the others. But what we'd seen is part of the surplus budget from this year going to, I think it was $5 million, going to retrofit all of the city buses inside of Calgary with plexiglass shields to protect the drivers. And I think that's great. I think that, the city is being responsible because, Crystal, we, as government, we are responsible to keep people safe in their jobs, and nobody should go to work and feel unsafe. But we took an idea that we could have maybe refined to a single community, and I'm not sure the practicality of this. I'd have to look at the analytics, and retrofitted those buses instead of doing the entire, and then maybe reallocated those funds towards something else. But the problem with it is now that the drivers feel safer through these plexiglass shields, who doesn't feel safer? It's the commuters that use the bus. So, okay, so they're not beating up the bus drivers. What if they start attacking the people inside of the buses? We can't build plexiglass shields inside of all of our buses for the rest of them. Again, we have to address the crime holistically.
Mm-hmm.
So why would we take something that we could potentially pilot? And when I say pilot, I don't mean like we piloted the bicycle lanes where we rolled them out and then keep throwing more money at it to try and make it a successful program when it's not. I mean, pilot a program, watch the actual analytics for successes, and if it is a success, try it throughout the rest of the city, doing things responsibly. And then when we look to extend these things into other neighborhoods, we know that we're doing the best job that we can to keep other communities safe. And if it doesn't work, scrap the pilot and let's find other ideas from other cities that do work and implement them in ours.
Well, Sheldon, this has been a very exciting conversation, and there's so much more I want to talk to you about, but in the interest of time, I think we will probably cut it here. But what is one thing you would like to leave with our viewers in running your campaign, or what your priorities are at City Hall? What's one thing you really want viewers to know about you in your push for City Council?
Well, one of the big things in this municipal election, and I think this is a really important election. I mean, we all say that every election is important, and they are, but this current election is fundamentally important because this is the first time in the history of Calgary and inside of the history of Alberta where we're looking at municipal parties being introduced into City Council. Absolutely. And I'm opposed. So I'm running as an independent councillor inside of my community. And the reason that I think that this is fundamentally important, I mean, it's not just my longevity inside of the community. It's not because I grew up here, went to school here, owned businesses here. It's not because I've been boots to the ground, walked 1,200 kilometers to try and show my neighbors and the people inside of my ward that I'm working hard. But I'm doing all of this as an independent candidate because when I go into City Council, I want them to know that I'm bringing their voices and our concerns to City Council. I'm not funded, I'm not subsidized, and I'm not responsible to third-party advertisers, to advocacy groups, and I'm not going to toe a party line. I'm there to represent them. That's who I am. a member of my community. And I say this to everybody. I'm not looking to lead our community into city council. I'm there to stand shoulder to shoulder with all the people who are new to our communities, which we all once were, to people like me who've raised children or who are raising children inside of their community, who volunteer in the programs, in the community centers, who now have grandchildren growing up in the community. I'm here to stand shoulder to shoulder with them and represent their voice in city council.
Mm-hmm. Well, those are very insightful words. So thank you so much, Sheldon, for taking the time to chat with us here today. And to everyone watching, thank you for joining us as well. Sheldon hit on some of the notes there, but municipal elections shape the everyday life of our city. So stay informed, stay engaged, and very importantly, get out to vote this October. So thank you, Sheldon. And I'm really grateful for your time today.
Oh, thanks a lot for the opportunity.